financial advisory practice. So I just want you to know you're in for a wild ride, new information, and a lot of exciting new future because of Stephen Oliver.
If you have any immediate questions, jump in. I had some follow-up from last week that dawned on me we probably need to cover more thoroughly to tie that together. So Greg, Mindy, I thought I put together a simple marketing stat sheet I thought we might walk through.
I just saw that go up in the Facebook group.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I put it up as an Excel spreadsheet and I put it up as a PDF in case it doesn't read. Any quick questions? No? Okay.
Oh, Brian, did you have any from when you and I chatted before Thanksgiving? You had a question about some copy? You may have figured it out.
What was that? I don't remember now.
Well, we'll put the suggestion in your brain and it'll pop up in a minute, I'm sure.
Okay.
You know, it always seems like the harder you think about it, the harder it is to recall, and then put it in the back of your mind. But let me, Mindy, you're going to have to make me host, co-host, or some damn thing.
Oh, absolutely. It'll only let me make you host. So there you go.
There you go. So I am host now.
Yep.
Okay. So let me make sure I get the right screen and the view that will work. Let me know, guys, if this looks fine. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, you might want to zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, I will as we go. So let's see. How about there?
There you go.
Okay. So as you look at the spreadsheet, I mean, and to follow up on what we were talking about last week and a couple times now, you know, the starting point for really getting control over your business and getting a lot of different things going on is to really be on top of your numbers. And Mindy, you might get that call spreadsheet out that you did a minute ago too. That might be useful.
Okay.
Oops, I don't want to leave or cancel a meeting for anybody. Okay, so if you start with this, I mean, and you know, fill in the language for what you want these to mean for you, but you know, discovery meeting, one thing or another. But what we're looking at is keeping track of, and we can subset each of those numbers down quite a bit if we want. But how many leads did we generate? You know, how many people from various sources raised their hand saying that they were interested in at least learning more, receiving a free book, receiving a free report, attending a webinar, whatever. Just a total number of people who, not that we bought a list, pulled a list or something, but that they responded to something and raised their hand. And so if we start with going back up a step, you know, how much money we spent for this period, whether it be a month or a quarter or a year. And then we figure out how many total leads we've generated. That's going to, by dividing the leads into the or marketing leads into the marketing cost, that's going to give us what it costs to get a lead, right? And then we're going to look at how many of those turned into appointments. And something I didn't mark on the sheet, which I should have, is right here. We want to track the percentage. So the percentage of from lead to appointment. So are we getting 80%, 90%, 5%, 10%? What's the average lead to appointment ratio that we're getting? And then by benchmarking that by day, you know, by month, quarter, year, you can see if you're moving in the right direction, the wrong direction. By benchmarking it against other people that we're working with, you can get a sense of whether that's a good number or a bad number. And so next we want to know from those appointments we said, how many actually showed up, right? And then of those who actually showed up, how many do we actually end up with a follow-up meeting? And then of those, how many do we actually end up as new clients? Now, there's a number of different ways you could track this, but you know, I just put a simple number in here is, you know, what's the average first year value of the people we brought in as new clients? And again, whoops, as I just erased it. But, and again, depend upon, what you're selling them and, how you're getting commissioned on it, and whether it's a pure AUM deal or whether it's selling an annuity, one thing or another. Obviously on a per person basis, that's going to vary. But, and really, I probably should add another field in here of how much revenue is going to get collected directly this month. Of course, some of you have a pretty decent time interval between when you collect commissions on some of this stuff, but what are on average is going to has been generated for the first year, then by dividing what our cost per new client was by what that average first year revenue, that gives us a thumbnail return on investment for the first year, right? So let's say it cost me $1,000 to get a new client, but the average client I'm bringing in is going to be worth $10,000 for the first year, or maybe a more realistic number might be 5,000. So now what I know is I've got a 5-to-1 return on investment. If the average revenue were going to be 2,000 and the average cost to get them was 500, now I've got an average of 4-to-1 return on investment for those marketing activities. And then the other number, which arguably is more relevant, but we look at the other two issues. One is how much they paid immediately or are paying in this first, or we're going to receive in the first month, versus lifetime value. Well, what I'm saying is lifetime value is arguably more relevant, and we all have financial backgrounds, so I guess we could do a discounted net present value, all that stuff. But generally, what you can expect to receive on the lifetime gives you a good sense of, if I spent $5,000, I'm going to, in all likelihood, have this person for $5,000 a year for 10 years. And so my expected lifetime value in today's dollars are $50,000, and it cost me $500 to get it. That's a pretty good long-term return on investment. So. But and again, we could subset these numbers, we could add to it, but the very least for any marketing source and for our total monthly, quarterly, annual, we want to have an idea of how many leads we're generating. We want to know what percentage made appointments. And by the way, you could subset this down by how many leads do we have, how many outbound dials do we do, how many people answered the phone, how many of people who answered the phone made appointments, and how many of those who made an appointment then came to the first meeting. Does that making sense? What you have to start with is, if you're not keeping good numbers on your business, which most people, to be fair, aren't, is you want to start with a simple set that doesn't become overwhelming, and then you gradually chunk it out from there. Greg, what would you add to that? And Mindy, this has been our week so far. So
yeah, I think that and Brian, it may feel oppressive to kind of keep track of this as an individual. If you're having employees or staff or secretary do this, it may seem oppressive, but once you get in the habit of doing this, even for yourself, it's how you manage your day and run your day, and to just kind of keep track of this at the end of every day makes your own management of time work a lot better. That's how I do everything at this point. I couldn't operate if I didn't have a clue, an idea of where things stood with all my numbers of everything that I do.
Right.
And if we don't know this, then what happens is we end up flying blind. We end up just trying every month. We're going, well, what are we going to do? There's two pieces of this. One is this, and the other is our marketing plan, having enough idea of what we're going to do the next 3 months and the next year. And then being able to measure it allows us to know whether we're doing anything right or wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
And most companies, and I don't know about your accounting firm or the firm you're working with. And Barbara, this is probably, the same for you guys, is they generally do a pretty lousy job. Even big firms, they generally do a lousy job of paying attention to these kind of things.
Yeah, well, accountants all tend to only look at what the end result is of all this, which is what the the monthly, the quarterly, the annual revenue is, and then backing their way into it and understanding how you got to that point. Whether you're doing the books for somebody else or you're looking at your own numbers is not something they're used to doing. So moving along, and and to keep it simple, so that lead number up above ultimately is going to be an aggregate of whatever different marketing activities you have within the the marketing Parthenon in any given month. And the list I put together here is anything but comprehensive. In other words, there's all kinds of things you can do that aren't on the list, or stuff that's on the list that you may not be doing. But I broke this one down by Facebook paid ad, LinkedIn paid ad, LinkedIn direct messaging, direct mail, webinars, live in-person meetings, speaking engagements or other host parasite type of relationships, website SEO, in other words, people who got to your website organically, various content marketing. And these two are somewhat interchangeable, and oftentimes difficult to sort out, but podcasting, YouTube channel, LinkedIn newsletter, etc. Direct referrals, meaning, somebody, one of your clients calls and says, my brother-in-law needs to talk to you, or you're having a meeting with somebody and you work through isolating faces and, ask them who in their bowling league, might have these problems, who in your, that you work with, might have these issues, etc. Referrals from live events. And again, we found one of the best ways to generate referrals is having live events. And again, that can include things like webinars, but having a client appreciation event, an educational event, social. I know one advisor that has like a massive birthday party for himself every year, and all of his clients bring friends to the birthday party, and that generates enough traffic to keep him busy for most of the year. But what, and again, this is something we've talked about a little bit before, but to generate referrals, what we have a tendency to do and think is that if I provide them good service, of course, they're going to tell their friends about me. And the reality is most people, one, they're not good at pitching your services. Two, and this wasn't my idea. I heard, if I remembered who it was, I'd give attribution, somebody's podcast, but they made a really good point, which is your clients tend to only know what you do by the problems you solve for them. So if you got a client who's 70 years old and you put together a retirement dispersal plan and one thing or another for them, and now they have their son or daughter who has a college planning issue they're trying to work on, and they're trying to start a savings plan and one thing or another, may not immediately jump to mind for them that you're a good resource for that person. So educating your clients on what all the different types of problems and things you do. I've mentioned before, but really kind of the way I got back into this is I had at the time, Greg, I don't remember, it gives me hives to remember, but something on the order of 60 staff members.
Yeah.
And I was looking for deferred executive compensation plans and executive retirement plans for my key staff members, and ended up hooking up with a friend and client for years now, Peter Harnish, to do that. But the thing is, he would then have to make sure that he had explained to me, well, I don't just work with companies, and I don't just work with small businesses, and I don't just work with executive compensation plans. I also handle individual life policies. I also handle long-term care. I also handle asset management and so forth. And in fact, to tell you the truth, he wasn't very good at that at the time. And I sent a number of friends to other people just because I didn't realize that was something that was in his bailiwick. But again, what we have found the best way is live events. The third thing, and I could subset this, but is we see that one of the best ways to generate referrals also is pass along tools. That's why ultimately a financial advisor having their own book and then giving each of your clients 5 or 7 copies. I know one advisor who's well into the 8 figures now as far as their RIA revenue. They do a quarterly book, and all very small, Greg, the ones that you like, 30, 40 pages. But then they're on very specific topics, and they give each of their clients 5 copies, and they're generating a tremendous amount of referrals by their clients passing along those books. But then what we're doing here, and looks like I misspelled qualified. They don't teach spelling in the MBA program. Okay, so what we're doing is totaling how many came per source, and then I tend to subset it for us, which is how many of those are qualified, right? The more broadly I'm and again, this is something for you to define is, if you get a 17-year-old kid who has $23 in the bank and they want your advice on how to put stuff together, and you're doing it as a service because they happen to be the son or daughter of a good client, that's one thing. But that, from my standpoint, that wouldn't be a qualified lead. At the other end of the spectrum, you look at, for instance, Fisher Investments Marketing. They make it very clear in the headline, that if you have less than $500,000, you're not a qualified client that they're trying to get to raise their hand. So, but what you'll do in an awful lot of marketing, Facebook is a good example where you may generate 100 leads, but you may find out either through the questionnaire process on the opt-in form, or you may find out when you actually talk to them that they're not what you would consider a qualified lead. In other words, they're not somebody you really were trying to get them to raise their hand. And so I always create a number of how many of those leads we generated per source were qualified, and then how much we spent, and therefore what was the cost per qualified lead, right? And again, with a source like Facebook, I might have a lead cost of $12, but by the time I go through it all, my qualified leads are costing me 120. Well, as long as I know, and then I know what my ratios are, and then I can back into what my return on investment is, that tells me whether it's a good deal or a bad deal. And Greg, what you and I see a lot is advisors getting frustrated at generating leads that aren't qualified. But the broader you spread your wings, both on client events, but more accurately on content marketing, SEO, and broadcast sources like Facebook, the more you generate leads that aren't necessarily qualified. Mindy, the bane of your existence is the Pakistanis. Nothing against Pakistanis, but some 14-year-old in their basement trying to hack the site is not a very useful lead.
People that live in Pakistan that are not our target market, rather than, we love people that live in the United States that want to be our target market. But the
who are qualified.
Yeah. I mean, the idea with this is making sure that we're paying attention to the results that we get and making sure that we're doing enough stuff. And if we don't pay attention to the results we get, it makes it onerous to do enough stuff. So, Brian, we're trying to get, and Barbara, we're trying to get enough things happening so that we get a healthy lead flow from enough streams. And that's where we need to go next. You've got some really obvious ones that we want to work right away, Brian, and, Barbara, you guys do too, that we're trying to hit right now, but we want to get those, a good handle on those so that we can go to the next ones.
Yeah. Questions on this so far? No, you guys are easy. Okay, so now let's go. And this is a pure Dan Kennedy talking point. But when you start to analyze these numbers is there is a tendency to go through the list and go through this cost per qualified list and say, well, my direct referrals and my referrals from a live event are by far my cheapest sources. And then following that, it's my website SEO. So I'm going to eliminate all this stuff and I'm going to go with the cheapest sources of lead. Right. And it's a common tendency to do that. Mindy and us going through our lead sources and lead tracking, do I have that tendency in any way, shape, or form?
Oh, I was
No.
trying to say not at all, but I mean 100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
yeah.
What you want to be doing is looking at what your return on investment are for each of these things, and maybe to pull my miseducation up as an economist from years back, is an economist would say is you want to invest until your marginal investment equals your marginal return. Now most people aren't going to go that far, but if I was producing a 3-to-1 first year investment on one of my more expensive lead sources, I still want that 3-to-1 return. If I'm getting a 2-to-1 return on one of my more expensive lead sources, I still want that. And if I'm getting a 20-to-1 return on a lead source, then the question is that something, and in all cases, is that something I can double down on? Can I do more of that activity? Will that grow that source? Can I, what a common conversation I have with people is they'll have a relatively low cost per lead on Facebook and a relatively low cost per qualified lead. And in a really good return on investment, I'm always saying, let's double down. What happens when we double the budget? What happens when we triple the budget? At what point do we increase the lead cost to the point that the ROI isn't acceptable? And in each of these sources, sometimes that's what seems sometimes counterintuitive approach. So rule one is you want every lead that gives you a positive return on investment. Rule two, you never cut anything just because some other source is doing better. And number three, any source is giving you a positive return on investment. You evaluate, again, depending upon what it is this something with more frequency of that activity? An extreme example might be, somebody once a year does a live customer appreciation event and they get 20 qualified referrals and end up with 10 of them as clients. And then the question is what if we did that spring and fall? What if we did it quarterly? Would that reduce the numbers? Would it make it better? What if we did something like that once a month, maybe for different excuses each time to have it? What would have for that? So you always want to look at, could we increase the frequency of that activity? Could we increase the marketing of that activity? Could we throw money at that activity? We'll see people who are getting good traffic from blogging and podcasting and all that stuff, but they don't do enough of it to get much traction. But their return on not only money but time is very positive. Question is, what if we did 3 times as much of that? What if we syndicated that content out to other areas? What if instead of doing a blog once a week, we did a blog once a day? How would that affect the search traffic and so forth? Greg, Mindy, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think people get caught up in what my budget is versus what like this budget idea. Well,
Yeah.
what's your budget? And that's the wrong way to look at it. That's the wrong way to look at it. If my budget is, if I'm spending $1 and I make $10, I want to do that all day long.
Yeah.
And understand the point of view here. We're not trying to take your dollar. We're trying to get you more dollars. We're not trying to. Nothing that we're doing here is we're explaining this is us trying to get that dollar from you. We're trying to get you to spend the dollar somewhere else and to get $10 back. And we're going to tell you if you spent that dollar and you got 50 cents to stop doing that unless we need to fix it.
Yeah, well, and maybe to say that in a little bit more of expanded fashion here, where now where the heck did that go? Here we go. So of the various sources, again, this is anything but comprehensive, is it's certainly possible to say, I could manage to spend, I only have $1,000 to spend. And, if whatever the number is, 5,000, 10,000, whatever. And if that's the case, what we always do from a marketing standpoint is what our tendency to do is with each new client anyway, is we go through all the different opportunities and you say, well, I have a graph of this, I don't have it handy. There's I think of it this way, is there's marketing activities that are high cost, low time engagement. There are marketing activities that are low or zero cost and high time. And there's marketing activities that might be high cost and lots of time engaged. And there's marketing activities that are, somewhere in between, if you think about it as a graph. Greg, I don't have a good example of a high cost, high time intensive for us. I can give you an example from my friend Mark, who, he runs NutriBio, which is a nutrition company. Every year they go to the 2 or 3 biggest trade shows. So they go to the Arnold Classic, and they go to there's a big one, a big fitness trade show in LA, and one thing or another. And those are both because they load up 5 or 10 staff members. He's there for the week, and they spend $50,000 to $100,000 on a booth, or sometimes more, and they spend $40,000-$50,000 on the space, and it becomes a $200,000 plus high time intensity, high labor activity. But they're willing to do it because they know it's where the buyers are going to be, in their case, for GNC and for all of the other big retailers. They know it's where the big fitness businesses are going to be, et cetera. So it's worth their while. In almost all cases, I try to avoid high time, high money. What I like about spend money, don't spend time, is as your income escalates, time is a limited resource, but then you have more and more money to throw at creating clients. But early on is you can start with things like webinars that are practically for free, promoted to email, text message, and so forth to your client list. You can start with working through your client base, asking for referrals. You can start with figuring out the biggest employers in the area. You can find other people that you can use the term host parasite, or you can partner with to create a positive lead flow. So a lot of that stuff requires you go take the time to do it, but doesn't require any or much out-of-pocket cost.
Yeah, and there's a variety of those to hit your target market. And really in the end, we like to do a lot of all of that stuff.
Yeah.